friends, if you have a story of your own you'd like to be featured on the channel, please send it to my email address at originalgensen@gmail.com. With that being said, let's start the videos. For context, I'm a female and 20 years old. Started an OnlyFans account over the summer to support myself through school, and things are great until I posted my Amazon wish list. Amazon doesn't release your address to people who gift you items, but third-party sellers can. And that's where I went wrong. By the way, not trying to promote it here, this is a very frightening story and I felt like it should be shared. In late July, I got a puppy. One night around 2 a.m., I took him outside to go to the bathroom. While he was doing his business, I noticed a car parked outside of my family home. I saw a figure in the car and couldn't tell if they were looking at me, but I couldn't make out their face because it was pitch black outside. Feeling a bit uneasy, I picked up my puppy to take him back inside. And when I started to move, the car parked in my driveway. I sprinted back inside and locked the door, but they never approached my house. The next morning I went to check the mail and there was an envelope addressed to my OnlyFans name with $20 in it, but no note. I was currently still at home with my parents who had no idea about my OnlyFans account, so I didn't mention it to them. A week later I moved back to my college town to get ready to start school. At this time I had stopped posting for the time being until I could figure out how they got my address. I've watched enough crime shows to know there's a possibility I could be in danger. I live in a duplex with a gated parking lot, for reference. One morning, I was planning on vlogging my trip to Target, because I was planning on starting a YouTube channel in the near future since OnlyFans felt unsafe. When I got to my car, it had been ransacked and my vlogging camera was missing. I know it's my fault for leaving it in my car, but I was using it the night before, and since I live in a gated area, I didn't think it would be unsafe. It wasn't in plain sight either. I had hidden it inside of my glove box. I used that camera to film my content, and the SD card that was in there had all of my unreleased photos/videos. I know they stole it just for the SD card. Anyways, this is where the story gets weird. There are cameras outside in the parking lot, so we were able to catch the person break into my car and find the camera. And they didn't touch any of the other 7 cars on the lot. They know which car was mine, which suggests they had been watching me for a bit. After they got the camera, they walked around the duplex, until stopping near my window. My bedroom faces an outside street and my blinds are broken, so it's very easy to see in. I have a curtain, but it doesn't cover my window all the way. This person watched me sleep for an hour or so. I have no idea why they didn't try to break in, but thank God they didn't. This person then sold the camera to a pawn shop, and since I knew the serial number, the police were able to find it. However, my SD card was still missing. I believe the police are still trying to track them down, but I have broken my lease and moved to a new place, so hopefully that will keep me safe. Hey guy who terrorized me at home and apartment and stole my camera, let's not meet. So this story starts on a Sunday night. I'm just up in my room watching YouTube videos and also getting to work on my animations. A couple minutes go by and my sister calls me down. She tells me to lock my door because there was a man on the run. At first I was scared because I didn't have much information on this man, who was running from the police. So I had assumed that he was either a serial killer on the loose, or a predator, breaking into people's homes and doing vile things to them. My sister left to go somewhere and I was left home alone until my mom got back from work meeting. The only defense my mom had was a rifle under her bed, but I didn't know how to use it properly, and my mom isn't very fond of me carrying a firearm of hers without her parental advision. So I was sitting in my room paranoid as hell because I didn't have much information about this dangerous man, and I had fears of dying young or being violated. I called my dad for about 14 to 60 minutes because I was scared and I didn't want anything to happen to me. So I stayed on the line with him, and My voice was shaking the whole time, while I was telling my dad that I didn't feel safe, and that I didn't want anything bad happening to me. I had a box of kitty litter that was heavy enough to knock any intruder unconscious, so I stood at the top of my steps and had myself prepared. I waited until my mom got home, and when she got home, she told me everything. Apparently there was a druggie or drug dealer who had a bag of heroin in his car, and he had a gun. And the thought of that even scared me. I sat upstairs having the scariest and worst feeling I ever had. Although nothing happened to me, I hope that whoever was on the run with drugs, heroin, had a pistol on him, was locked up, and away from me, causing no harm to anybody. I just want to leave on a final note by saying, heroin drug dealer who had a gun making me paranoid for my life, let's not meet. When I was about 16, 9 years ago, my family was living in a suburban area outside of LA. It was a nice neighborhood, kids rode their bikes in a group, parents waved to each other and helped keep an eye out on people's houses. You could join a barbecue if you walked by it at the right time. Well, my dad was working nights at a hospital in the city, and that left myself, female and 16, and my mom, who was 36, and my sister, who was 12, and my brother 8 at home at night, from 6:30 p.m. to around 7:30 a.m. the next day. One night we were cooking, listening to music, and just all around having a good night, and everyone's in bed by 9. I'm woken up to the sound of our front door being rattled, and my mom calling my dad like he is home. Our house was laid out like this. There's a front door and a small entranceway, and the right side wall, facing the door from outside, was my brother's room. Myself and my sister were on the other side of him, and the doorway leading into our dining room. My mom's house was off from the living room towards the back of the house, so they typically turned on lights to come by our rooms. It wasn't all that uncommon for my dad to get let off of a shift a few hours early, and end up home before 7. My front door was frosted glass, and in the middle that was clear enough we could see whoever was at the door. It was an old and a little off, so typically you had to put a little force into opening the door, even if it's unlocked. This part my mom filled in. She'd gotten up, also hearing the door, and thought my dad was home, as I did. However, upon calling out to my dad to confirm and turning on the light switch, whoever it was at the door froze and noticeably jumped. She had still been walking closer to the door to open it to help him, still half asleep, when she realized that the man in the doorway was as tall as my dad, but he had a full head of hair, as well as an outline not matching the familiar outline of my dad coming home in scrubs. This man was wider than my dad, and once he could see my mom in the doorway, he started not only turning the knob, but throwing himself against the frosted glass. Okay, back to what I know. I don't know what kept me from rolling over and going back to bed, but the next few seconds I heard my mom scream, and sat up in time to hear the footsteps and see her as she disappeared into the bedroom to come back out with a revolver my dad had bought for her birthday. At this point I had rolled over and checked my cell phone quickly to see if it was 1:30 in the morning, and had dialed 911 while my mom was pointing the gun at whoever was at the door, trying to force their way inside. "Stop, or I'll shoot you. I'm on the phone with the police, and they're on their way. I will use force if you enter my home." My mom was screaming at this huge man at the door who, after hearing her for the second time and third time, finally stepped back from the door and was just staring at our shapes from the outside of the frosted glass. After a moment's thought, he seemed to like his chances because he had stepped forward again, and only ran once my mom pulled the pin back and repeated what she had been saying, adding that she might decide not to even wait for him to be inside. He ran off, as I mentioned, and I stayed on the phone with 911 as my mom stood at the doorway, her gun still in both of her hands, aimed at the door the way my dad had taught her to hold it, just the weekend before we had all gone to the range. It was only a moment after the man had fled that 2 uniformed officers filled the doorway the man had just been in. and when they knocked, I realized, after she didn't respond to them identifying themselves. However terrified my mother was, her voice shook as she told the officers that she had a weapon, but that she wanted to hear their badge numbers before she would open the door, so I can confirm with the dispatcher. Once they did, she opened the revolver and unloaded it, putting it on the table and crying as I opened the door for the police. They took our statements, had several patrol cars out looking, and found him a few hours later 6 blocks from our house. However, he had made it into the residence he was trying to break into, and they caught him in the middle of robbing the retired couple he had knocked unconscious. So, home invader, let's not meet. This happened 2 years ago, August 11th, 2018. And since the anniversary just passed, I thought I should finally share the story. My fiance and I were on the second night of our 2-night camping trip at a popular campground, about a half hour from where we live. For reference, my fiance is black. We live in a predominantly white, conservative, and racist area. This is important for later. On our first night, we kept hearing noises in the woods around us. The campsite right beside ours to the right was occupied, but the one on the left was not. The campers are about 150 yards apart, and we had camped here in the same exact spot the year before. Needless to say, we were familiar with the area, and the various kinds of animals that live in the woods. The first night, we heard shuffling around our tent. It was obviously something large moving around. We brushed it off and assumed it was just a deer. Now back to the main event. On August 11th, we spent the day at the battlefields at a town over with my family. They'd all been invited to join us for the day by my fiance as a surprise for me while he proposed to me. We stayed with my family until the evening, about 6 p.m., before heading back to our campsite. When we got back, things were really odd. Someone had obviously been in our tent. Our blankets had been thrown around, clothes were on the floor, and my backpack had been rearranged and I was missing underwear. But hey, we were stupid 19-year-olds and decided that since whoever had bursted in had left and hadn't taken anything important, it was fine and they wouldn't come back. So we set up our campfire and set out until it was dark, roasting hot dogs and s'mores, smoking cigarettes and celebrating our engagement. Around 9:30 p.m., we put out our fire and decided to go into our tent for the night to celebrate a little more. Nothing too loud or obnoxious. Immediately after we finished, we started to hear the noises outside of our tent again. But this time, we focused in. We could hear clear footsteps at one point, a man whispering. We looked at each other and our eyes got wide. Someone was definitely walking outside of our tent. We were still and completely silent, just listening to the footsteps, and we heard whispering again. Shit, make that 2 men walking around our tent. And as if we had the ability to read minds, my fiance said, I have to go to the bathroom. And I agreed. The bathroom was up the hill from our site. Most people who were in the lower sites, like ours, drove their cars up to the bathroom. Now here's the part I still get chills thinking about. We got up and were getting dressed. My fiance had just turned on the light in our tent and put his blinders on when a man spoke directly to us from right outside the tent. What are you doing? I can't even describe how malicious and menacing the voice sounded. It was clearly directed at us, and he had said it with a snicker. He was watching us through the walls of the tent. Again, for this part, we were stupid 19-year-olds, so we decided to just run it for the car. My fiance grabbed his pocket knife and his keys and stepped out of the tent. He pulled me with him and we ran like hell to the car. I heard the footsteps running behind us and then turning and running up to another campsite. At the bathroom, we talked over our options. We talked about sleeping in the car or driving into the town. Then we had another idea. We drove back down to our campsite and began packing everything into the car. At this point, it was around midnight. We moved faster than I think either of us thought possible. wrapping up the tent with our belongings still in it and grabbing our folding chairs. We were all packed in 5 minutes and hopped into the car to leave. I jumped out at the end of the drive and grabbed our nameplate, which had my full name on it, off of the post. As we pulled out of the campsite, I saw our assailants for the first time. Stalking through the woods onto the campsite were 2 tall white men. I realized that these were the same 2 men who had been driving past our campsite the whole time we were there, just glaring at us and muttering to each other. One was wearing camo hunting gear, and the other was wearing a Confederate flag tank top. Both were carrying large hunting knives, unsheathed and at the ready. They turned when they saw our car drive away, and one started to make chase, until the other stopped him. I made eye contact with the man in camo, and he smiled the most terrifying smile at me, and shook his head slowly. We drove the long way home, taking all the weirdest, hardest to follow roads, and called my dad, so he'd know that we were coming. We told my dad everything, and he shrugged it off, as us being paranoid. So I never told anyone else besides all of you now. I am convinced to this day that this was going to be a racially motivated attack. The campground was not heavily populated, and my fiancé was the only non-white person at any of the campsites. It was no accident that the 2 men who had been shadowing us since our arrival, and wore Confederate flags, and had one on their truck, decided to target the interracial couple. I still get cold chills when I think about how close we were to being killed, or seriously hurt that night, and just how lucky we were that our reckless plan to just make a run for it worked. So those men who stalked our campsite with the hunting knives, let's not meet. When I was 25, there was a short time I was staying at my aunt's. It was her, my 2 cousins, and I. She lives in a nice apartment complex, and her unit is on the lower level. Her living room has a lot of windows that she keeps open for fresh air, and for her cats to watch people. Her unit happens to be on the corner near a grassy courtyard path. When I had first moved in, I noticed a man who gave me a off vibe. My cousins and aunt said that he lived upstairs and 2 units over, recovering from hard drugs that permanently messed him up. His parents paid for him to stay there, as they didn't want him with them. They also said other than hearing him mumble and say weird things, no one had ever had an issue. My aunt works nights and leaves at 3 a.m. My younger cousin works nights and leaves at 2 a.m. They usually left my same age cousin and I, the only 2 there, until we leave for work around 8. For context, it is a very open living room to dining room plan. My aunt always has people staying over, so she has a second couch in the dining room, in place of a table. This is where I slept. She stayed on the one in the living room. My aunt also has never been one to lock her doors, until this incident. One night I'm on the phone trying to sleep at about 1 a.m., and I hear a man yelling. He's yelling, "Don't shoot!" and banging on the door to the right of ours. 2 male college students live there. It just told him he had the wrong apartment and to leave. He says, "Sorry," and walks off. I'm looking through the kitchen window, which is in the direct line of sight from my couch bed, and it's the weird neighbor who sees me and grins. He then walks back to his house. I was unsettled, but not enough to wake anyone else up over it. I told my family nonchalantly the next day in a LOL, that was weird way. My cousins and I watch a movie and head off to bed. I have a very hard time staying asleep, but I woke up this time to a feeling of someone watching me. I check my phone and it's around 3:30 a.m., so I know it's not my aunt or cousin. I sit up and figure I'll go watch TV on my aunt's couch, since she was already gone. That feeling gets stronger as I'm in the living room. Then I see a shadow of a person standing still in the glass courtyard looking in. I froze. I immediately go back to my couch and get my phone. As I do, the person is gone. I am now trying to calm myself down and think of waking my cousin up, when I hear the creepy man's voice. He is now at the kitchen window, which looks out directly in front of her front door. I drop to the floor out of the line of sight and start frantically trying to call my cousin. The man is now saying things at the window / front door like, "I'm not gonna hurt you," and "I'm unarmed," over and over again. His face is up against the window. Then he starts talking about wanting to pet the cats he saw through the window. I can't get a hold of my cousins. It's been 20 minutes of this, and at this point, in this completely clown shit situation, I didn't have many options. I could jump up and run for a knife, but I'd need to go to the kitchen. I could try to respond and ask him to leave, but I've learned when you underestimate crazy, you lose every time. I now hear him knocking and knocking while repeating his nonsense. I'm doing that ridiculously looking army crawl snake slither across the floor down the hall now. I see the door handle start to turn. I'm about to jump up when my cousin burst out of his room directly across from the front door. Now, he's not the biggest guy, but boy was he intimidatingly mad at the circus show taking place at his front door. He starts yelling at the guy that he needs to get the fuck off his porch, and that he's calling the cops. The man tries to say, "I'm unarmed. I'm not going to hurt you. You don't need to be afraid." My cousin goes off and yells, "That's fucking dandy. It's 4 a.m. You need to leave, or I'll call the cops. What the fuck is wrong with you?" So the guy backs up with his hands in the air and leaves. Needless to say, we didn't go back to sleep. My aunt was called, who called the apartment manager. The next day when she came home from work, his parents were there packing and moving boxes in the truck from his place. Maybe he was trying to get me to open the door by seemingly friendly. Maybe he had a bad trip and really wanted to pet my cat to feel better. We will never know. Hey friends, thanks for checking out today's video. If you haven't yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button to be notified when I drop a new video or stream. Also be sure to check my video's description, as I've actually hidden some links in there to some fun stuff such as my Discord server, merch, and my social medias. I hope everyone's having a good night. And remember,
Number 5. Someone farted in the elevator and blamed it on my dog. I think it was me.